Would you believe it if I tell you that you can grow on a per plant basis up to 500 kilos of tomato in one season, which is 9 months. So a 9 month plant tomatoes growing inside a greenhouse with proper care being taken can yield up to 400 kilos. So it's a leap of faith. It's a leap of, you know, everything that we have known of about, and it's a change of paradise. Interestingly, India has adopted greenhouses over the last 15, 20 years in some areas. In the west coast of India, there is a lot of greenhouses, also in Bangalore. Many of them are beginning to make the transition towards higher end technologies with larger investments, using a lot of high end products in terms of controlling fertigation, that is the fertilizer and nutrient management, and controlling climate. And gradually, we are getting to a phase where all these greenhouse units are working like industrial processes. That is what we are attempting also as a business, and that is what we intend to popularize across India.
I'm pretty sure all of us, know how crucial the agricultural sector is to any country, and more so importantly to a country which is an agrarian, primarily an agrarian economy like India. A lot of people are generally unaware to the specific risks and rewards of being part of that sector, right? Majority of us don't know the ins and outs of actually what goes on in that sector, or rather how it has developed over the course of last couple of decades. So in today's session, we have Mr. Debashish Mohapatra from Verve Consulting with us to enlighten us not only about the different types of challenges that an agricultural enterprise might face, but also the exciting new opportunities that the sector presents to the investors. To introduce him, he is the chairman of Verve Consulting Private Limited. It's a consulting firm. He is also the alumnus of IIM Calcutta and also the prestigious London School of Economics. Having 25 years of experience, he has built deep expertise in the areas of agriculture, climate change, infrastructure, energy, and many other industries. With that, I would let Debashish present today's topic to all of us here. So, over to you, Debashish.
Okay, thank you so much, Sandeep and Abhigyan. Pleasure being here. And actually, when I hear some reference to myself about being having developed deep expertise, I really don't know because I'm constantly learning. And experiment today is also a little bit about not just sharing my prior experience and exposure, but also about picking up from all of you around what you have seen, experienced, and worked on, so to speak. So let me start with this: that I quit my corporate job in '97 to get into agriculture because I have always found that extremely exciting. Not just because of the growth potential of it, but because I thought that there was nobody who had, rather the few who have looked at agriculture as a corporate business. Of course, you hear parent companies who are doing this, but in India, most of the glamour has been associated with non-agriculture based companies. I believe strongly, and I continue to hold that opinion, that India today has probably the best potential for business in agriculture, not through only the standard means of growing crops, but also through various forms of technology associated services and businesses. So, to that end, it is a mega portfolio of industries by itself. So, whatever I say today or whatever I touch upon will only be a fraction of what can be attempted and is being attempted around the world. So, to begin with, all of us understand agriculture as production of agricultural crop. Now, please note, agriculture includes even marine stock fisheries. It includes lots of different organisms which are like vermicomposting, earthworm growing. silk worm growing, etc., sericulture, etc. So agriculture is actually, in that sense, itself a composite of multiple industries. Now, it will be foolhardy on my part to try and touch upon most of those. I will focus on areas which are close to my heart. And to that end, we have prepared a very small presentation. I hope you guys can kind of pick out from a Zoom call to the extent that it is possible. Thank you. So most of the issues about agriculture relate to this. When the father asks the son, what do you wish to do? And he says, I wish to get into agriculture. The first question is the perception of risk, the perception of not being a stable, reliable business to get it. Secondly, the perception is always that agriculture is integrally associated with land and issues related to land. And thirdly, the problem of scale. So we have summarized these questions into these three. Are there platforms for agriculture investments? Can these platforms give a reliable output? Is that output level providing you adequate return? Now, I know these are questions which do not necessarily create a comprehensive set of questions, but it's a starting point for our discussion. So if you look at the industry in India, look at the size, 63,506 billion rupees in 2020. And it is expected to double in the next 5 years, assuming a 12% growth rate, which to my mind is conservative. Exports is now beginning to play a role. It was fairly minimal earlier. Tea was probably the only thing exported earlier. Now we have a bunch of crops being exported from India, including onions, strangely speaking. There was FDI in agriculture, fairly large numbers. That is partly because India has not been extremely friendly towards FDI till the 90s. And post 90s, it is still not opened out all sectors. Land ownership is still not open for non-Indians in limited context. Agricultural land is completely out of the purview of everybody from outside India, as in it is open to only people from India who will buy agricultural land, being Indian citizens. And there have been a number of other issues related to agriculture in terms of laws, insurance, in terms of land ownership, and in terms of availability of skilled manpower. But all that is political. So these are some numbers. I don't know how visible they are, but essentially they are showing a constant growth year on year and about a certain humongous size of possibility. Not to mention the forecast growth for specific industries like food and organic food, as well as even processed items. So let's look at the sectors which exist. At a very first glance, there are the financial services, which constitute a large part of the agriculture business: agriculture lending, agriculture insurance, agriculture value-add services, and then of course there is extension services, which is more like a knowledge sharing. There is transport related to agriculture. There are the ICT, the information and communication technology based services. There are production areas, meaning producing your raw materials for consumption, be it food of vegetable kind, food of the fruit kind, food of the fisheries kind, or even, like I said, sericulture and various other activities. There is trading as a business. There are local value addition activities like processing, milling, seeding, de-seeding, all of that. There is export as a business. And then you have the high-tech stuff like data science for agriculture. There is genetic modifications for agriculture. Some of it is obviously off limits within India, but there's a lot of stuff in the DNA mapping of vegetables and of crops, which is going on around the world. Then, of course, there is the support part, stakeholder management, where NGOs do a lot of work in terms of empowering people in terms of creating systems and procedures, all of that. So tons of different activities within agriculture. The biggest thing is this is probably the fastest growing sector in India as a composite whole and also as a unitary single business activity because of two reasons. Reason one, demand. Reason two, the fact that worldwide people are moving away from agriculture kind of gives India a chance to step in. And thirdly, the fact that India has such diversity, both in terms of land availability, climatic availability, as well as manpower availability. Then, of course, we have the whole domain of input management. Everything that goes towards producing agricultural, outputs also is a business by itself, where India has traditionally lacked and which is now coming back to India as a sector. However, all that being said, there are issues. Issues relate to, I would say, four categories. Climate, which leads to its own issues related to viruses, related to crop management, related to pests, all of that. There is the labor issue in terms of laborers finding it not attractive to remain within agriculture because of the lower levels of income. There is the land issue, which is essentially about small holdings of land across India, mostly through a government policy over a long period of time, where there was a tendency to move away towards individual holding of land rather than consolidated holdings. And of course, technology where research has still lagged behind in India, despite catching up quite fast over the last few years. There are also the allied issues of wasteland, being the fact that a lot of land in India lies fallow or uncultivable because of the nature of the land or the location of the land or the degradation of it over a period of time, especially in the areas which are carrying out mining or in the areas which have harsh climate and so on. So one example I'm giving, my idea is not to really focus on examples, but just as a aside for people who are interested in making investment avenues out of this. There is the simple thing of taking up wasteland, which costs, let's say, X rupees per acre, adding value through reclamation. There are many technologies available now. Just open up YouTube, you'll find multiple possibilities. Carrying out that activity and then selling the land at a far higher value. The whole reason land is cheap, the wasteland is because nothing can be developed there. The moment you make it development worthy, it automatically multiplies in value. This is like a low-hanging fruit model. So there are various technologies, and I won't delve too much into that. The other thing is about cropping of production, which is the area which Verve is now specializing in. The idea is about taking out 3 of the 4 boxes, maybe even all 4 of the boxes that I talked about, the 4 issues. Consolidating land into large patches, creating enough investment to set up technology and skills, using the returns from a economics of scale to pay high wages, and to look at taking the climate element out from your production process. So this is usually done through what is traditionally called polyhouses. You create a microclimate within a closed area, closed structure, and you carry out a lot of different technology-driven augmentations, which allow you to increase your output dramatically and to take out the element of risk. One of the first things, which was mentioned in the presentation invitation was, can you consider a plant that is a tree, a growing tree, as a machine? My answer is yes, you can. It's a bit like you give a plant everything it needs, it will give you a fixed amount of output annually. then based on further improvements, you can actually keep on enhancing that out. So for instance, let's say each of us would have seen, I'm taking the most used example, tomato. Tomato plants, which you grow in your rooftop, you will end up with a cluster of 10 or 15 or 20 tomatoes, which might add up to maybe a couple of kilos at best. Would you believe it if I tell you that you can grow on a per plant basis up to 500 kilos of tomato in one season, which is 9 months. So a 9-month plant tomatoes growing inside a greenhouse with proper care being taken can yield up to 400 kilos. So it's a leap of faith. It's a leap of, everything that we have known of about, and it's a change of paradise. Interestingly, India has adopted greenhouses over the last 15, 20 years in some areas. In the west coast of India, there is a lot of greenhouses, also in Bangalore. Many of them are beginning to make the transition towards higher end technologies with larger investments, using a lot of high end products in terms of controlling fertigation, that is the fertilizer and nutrient management, and controlling climate. And gradually, we are getting to a phase where all these greenhouse units are working like industrial processes. That is what we are attempting also as a business, and that is what we intend to popularize across India. The trick there is to use scale. So, for instance, we have started this process of setting up a 550-acre single farm, which will have 500 acres of greenhouse with 50 acres of control, facility. Our idea is that when people come in as small stakeholders in this, they can pretty much take a slice of the far higher income or the far higher risk-free income that will be generated from these large projects. Similarly, once these projects are set up, you can attract a lot of new technologies like growing exotic crops, which otherwise is not possible, using value addition processing technologies, using high-end equipment, creating labs which allow you to carry out experimentation, allowing your seed farms to take over and generate high-end seeds, all of that. So this process is a little bit about making sure that you have enough on your plate to be able to distribute to a lot of people. So the plate size has to be large, and your investments have to be large, your land holding has to be large, and you will then be the master of your own destiny. So this is just a summary of what we do. We are adding a bunch of things out there, including farm stay facilities, including research and development labs, and of course there is a certain plan, etc. Which, I mean, if people are interested, we can share. But our idea is that as a business, when we look at creating a new environment for agriculture, there is a lot of potential for people who appreciate this better to realize that agriculture can give you far higher returns than any other business that exists in India. That is provided you can invest adequately, provided you have the right people, and provided you have the right approach to the solution. So that's pretty much my presentation for now. I would love to kind of chat with you on any questions you have, any areas where you would like to kind of be more aware of, or even guide us towards new areas which you already are working on, etc. Over to you guys for questions. I see one question already there.
Thank you, Debashish, for such an engaging and enlightening session. Now we are opening the polls and the question to the audience. I mean, in case you have any questions, you can type it down in the Q&A box, or you can, pass it on to any one of us over the chat, and we will, read it out for you. So,
Sure.
so we have a question from Amol. He says how to raise fund for the agricultural sector, and how does he grow into a from a startup into a large scale company.
Give me a second. I'm just okay. The first question you need to ask yourself is this: forget large or small. Is your business plan crisp? As in, does it take into account all the challenges that you have identified and found good answers? If you are happy with that part of it, and you say, okay, these are my challenges, these are my answers, and I believe I've handled it properly. I just need, this amount of capital. That's the first step. Then, of course, the same has to be found acceptable by people who are experts in your area. So, for example, I think Amol has talked about organic farming. So, for organic farming to work out, you actually need to ask yourself what can go wrong. I'm happy to kind of delve on this deeper on a one-on-one basis, but essentially, the way I look at it is organic starts and ends with markets. If people are willing to buy your product in adequate quantities in a nearby location, you have largely answered your problem. If they don't, then you really have to find a good vendor who can take your output and provide you adequate margins. Because please note, organic by definition is very difficult to establish in terms of certification, in terms of the time taken for it to reach maturity. If you can write out those 4 or 5 years required to get certification, be accepted in the market, and to find a vendor who's willing to pick up from you, great. Nothing else. But please do write to me at the email ID mentioned. I'll be happy to try and answer a few of those questions.
So the next question we have from Sri: how is the export of agri products handled? Is there any help provided by the government?
Okay, I will give a slightly less popular answer. Government support is something which is fundamentally large in terms of contribution, but has a lot of caveats, which I think everybody is aware of. The issue here is many people blame the government fairly and at times unfairly. The fair part is that governments are reluctant to pay that subsidy because obviously these are very large numbers. The unfair part of it is this, that very often the project reports or the processes which are required for getting clearances are not clear enough. So somebody has to understand how the government functions to get a clearance. Now, that being said, there is corruption. There is obvious need to make the officer in charge of a project happy about your project for you to get that clearance. But it is not impossible. There are lots and lots of people who get it. And oftentimes it's also a function of the state you are in. Karnataka is one of the best states for agricultural subsidies, as is Maharashtra. Other states often have a lot of challenges trying to get the state government to recommend your application. So, to this end, what I would advise you is this: figure out in your state who are the consulting companies who offer services. I'm not saying sign up to them. From those companies, ask them how many applications they have cleared and what does it cost. When you start getting these answers, you'll also get a feel of what has worked and what doesn't. And in all of this, the solution usually is a lot of talking to people, different people, talking to the Central Horticultural Board also in your state, which usually is in the capital city of that state, they often are far more proactive and far better. Unfortunately, they don't have jurisdiction over everything. So you need to kind of make sure that you have a project which satisfies the central government needs. But that being said, it is not impossible. And again, like I said, some of these questions I can't answer on this forum, but I'll be happy to send an email response to people once they write.
Right. Next question from the audience. Somebody is asking with regards to more information about soil reclamation.
More information about?
Soil reclamation.
Oh, okay. Now, okay, that's a specialized subject.
Right.
So there are 3-4 dimensions to it. One part of it depends on the kind of soil. For example, wasteland is classified as different types. There is marshy wasteland, there is rocky wasteland, there is no rainfall wasteland, there is sandy stuff. So depending on the type of soil, different technologies are employed, which all of which aim at two things: creating some amount of water retention in the soil, creating some amount of usable soil, and thirdly, creating some base vegetation in that particular soil. These three methods are usually about 3-4 years in the making, and most of them look at making the land suitable for some degree of cultivation. They will not be suitable for a very high-end crop, but they'll be suitable for something which is more basic, more fundamental, like a hardy crop. So very often you have things like millets which grow on wasteland which has been reclaimed. And then of course we can also get into highly specialized areas wherein you set up a non-soil based farming operation out there, like the greenhouse thing which I talked about. So oftentimes this is the easiest solution, using wasteland for greenhouses. Of course, subject to a minimum availability of water and the climate being not unduly harsh.
Right. So there are two more questions from Amol and Abhinav with regards to connectivity on an investment platform as well as network connectivity. So I would request both of you to reach out to for these questions to reach out to Devashish directly. So at the end of the session, we will share his email ID. You can write to him, and I think that would be the best one, as he suggested, one-on-one session. You can get more information on that. We'll stick to the more technical questions over here. Next one is from Nick. Nick is asking how to make agriculture large scale. There are ceiling laws limiting amount of land which can be owned by an individual. Is it possible to own large scale land by forming a company? Also, there's hurdles in long term leasing of. Are there any hurdles in long term leasing of agricultural land?
Okay, very interesting questions, and let me be very honest with you. Unfortunately, there is no right answer for this, but the simple answer is yes, you can hold large amount of land as a company. This thing of ceiling is one of the most most complicated sets of legislation in India, because the application of it is completely discretionary, and clearly there is nothing which says that this is right, this is not right. That being said, the moment you start acquiring land, as long as nobody asks you any questions, you are good. And as long as your purpose is fairly well defined, there should not be any issues, but you cannot hold me to ransom for that. Different states often have different outlooks on this, but the surest way to do it is by government acquisition, which is a hellhole of a process. I would not advise anybody to go there, although they have tried to make land acquisition much easier in most states. To that end, depending on the size of, for example, we are acquiring 550 acres. The trick we have done is we are not acquiring 550 in our name. These are the 500 stakeholders, each of whom will get 1 acre each. Our job is to make it available to them. So we are looking at one single patch of land dividing it up into 1 acre each, and everybody takes 1 acre on their own account. Those are ways of, making sure that you never get stuck in a legal litigation later on. Whereas you could also have one company holding 72 acres of, non-standard land, 18 acres of standard land, etc. in any state. But there are also companies which hold 10,000 acres. The land holds, oodles of land across. That's part of the ownership. For the lease, again, there is no clear demarcation, but again, no restriction either. So it's your luck as to how somebody in the area chooses to oppose you or support. So my advice to all is take it on a case-to-case basis. Look at what is the land availability that you really need. If required, break it up into parcels of, manageable numbers owned by multiple people to make sure that never ever will you have a problem of it.
So the next question is from Ekansh. He's mentioning, sir, you have told high returns compared to other asset classes in the agricultural sector. What would be the minimum ticket size? And also, are there any body, governmental or otherwise, which takes money and investment is taken care like stock exchange? Also, he is very inquisitive with regards to what will be the taxation and tax brackets associated with investing in the agricultural sector.
Okay, so as of now, almost all forms of agriculture are tax-free, barring things like tea and the certain defined cash crops. The areas around chemicals and fertilizers is not tax-free. Trading is tax-free to some extent, but not tax-free in other areas. So I would say 90% of agriculture is now tax-free. 10% of agriculture as it's defined does attract taxes. Growing activities do not have any tax, like I said, barring those cash crops, defined cash crops. You also have a lot of subsidies available, which actually are far higher than the taxes. For instance, on your capital expenditure on a lab, you can get back 50% of it from the government, although theoretically 50% will translate to something like 30-35% at the end when it works out, because of a lot of restrictions on design requirements, on alignment with government norms, etc. Also the payoffs and so on. Things like greenhouses, there is a 30 to 40% subsidy. Irrigation, there is up to a 75% subsidy. Women entrepreneurs get far higher. Wells have a subsidy. Irrigation sources have a subsidy. And seeds have a subsidy for certain areas. So there's a whole bunch of things available, which really makes agriculture extremely attractive on paper, extremely attractive in reality when you plan it well. But any plan that you do has to have scale. Without scale, chance of you making money, that is a given. So anybody who hopes to make money from 1 acre of land is probably going to land up in trouble. So there was also the other part about threshold income. Threshold income, right. I would say that we are targeting from our business 27% to 35% as a range of return for us, which to my mind is substantially higher than any other business. And this is 27% risk. So it is made possible because of size. If we had done the same greenhouse over 50 acres, there is no way we would have made more than 11-12%. So your question has to be addressed from different angles, and happy to share more. There is no stock exchange for agriculture per se. There are the commodity exchanges for commodities. Now those commodity exchanges typically deal in very well-defined products. They're not like potato, onions, and so on. They are mostly like millets and pulses and so on and so forth. Basically non-perishable products. And
Right.
bank
So,
available. I think the last part of the question had banking. Banking is available for projects which are kind of allowed by NABARD. NABARD is kind of the nodal bank for agricultural project report uh, clearances. With every bank also having a department which looks at approving projects. Usually, NHB, National Horticulture Board, steps in certain cases. Some other cases there are direct banking relationships. Loans are available, but I would typically not advise people to look at the loan part to begin with. Take off on your own to the extent you can. When you want to grow, use the loan facility.
right. So the next question is from Abhinav. Actually, he has asked another question as well. So I'll club both the questions. Firstly, his question is, what are the new best practices we can learn from Israel for increasing yields apart from drip irrigation, greenhouse, and ultra high density plantation?
You're saying apart from these three.
Apart from these three, yes.
So, climate management, nutrition management, and seed quality. So you're talking about everything beyond that. Okay. So I don't know how to answer this question, but I'll try to give it a different angle. A plant, like I said early on, is a machine. I mean, think of it that it needs the right amounts of its nutrition, which is obviously, I'm talking nutrition in a loose sense, water, sunlight, nutrition, and of course the medical issues, if any. And there are other issues like humidity management, temperature management, also the pH management. Now, I don't know, this is going to get a little technical. There is something called plant sap. Sap movement is used as a parameter to check on the health of a plant. So this has a slightly advanced form of monitoring by meters which measure plant sap movement, which basically means that the rate of absorption of minerals or of nutrition is captured and managed. So Israel has Israel and now Holland and Israel pretty much are the leaders in this domain. And of course, it's not rocket science any longer. Most of it is available on the public domain. All the technologies, all the different equipments are all available. It's a question of understanding how to combine the costs of each with your market price that you get in your market. So one area which probably was missed out is packaging and preservation. So that's one post-harvest management. That's a big area. The second area is seed itself, and the third is probably something completely different, which is understanding the crop for your particular location. So I don't know if this answers your question, but broadly, these are the things which are beyond the few things that you have already covered. Of course, there is soilless. There is this concept of vertical farming, where you kind of maximize the area under a particular, surface. But I'm not a great fan of vertical farming, at least for India, because the cost of investment don't really justify the returns. It works for New York or some place where real estate is very expensive, but not for a cheap land location like India. Next, please.
So Abhinav also had one question previously, a short question. For the dissemination of information and best practices, would you recommend a portal or a group of like-minded people that he can be a part of or can join for this particular information?
See, this has actually become a very difficult one because there are interest areas which are narrower. So, for example, on Facebook, you'll find groups of people working on hydroponics or on vertical farming or on a particular crop or on a particular random technology. The issue is you may not find a single forum which addresses everything. It is just impossible. It's a bit like saying agriculture is like a multi-trillion dollar business, and you want to have one forum addressing each aspect of it, which is very, very difficult. So you have to choose what is the area of interest, and appropriate to that, you choose a forum that you wish to get.
So Abhinav, you can write to Devashish directly with regards to what specifically your area of interest is, and he will guide you further which specific forum to join. Coming to the next question, Ashutosh asked, what are the agricultural land leasing buying options available to the non-domicile residents of a particular state?
Okay. Now, non-domicile, you'll have to break up into two parts: Indian citizen, non-Indian citizen, Indian resident, non-Indian resident. So, right now in India, there are very few states which retain that earlier clause of farmer ownership of agricultural land. Maharashtra is probably one of the only few states remaining. Karnataka used to have it. Karnataka has knocked it off. So now anybody in India can own any land in India across it. And this pretty much is a post-COVID phenomenon when the government is realizing that agriculture is important and needs more people, more qualified people, and hence land cannot be an area of differentiation. Secondly, Indian taxpayers can buy agricultural land, and Indian resident, Indian citizen taxpayers. So I will now classify it into four categories. There is Indian resident, Indian taxpayer. There is non-resident Indian citizen. There is a non-Indian resident in India. And there is a non-Indian, non-resident foreign citizen. Okay? Now, in all these four categories, only one category can buy agricultural land, which is Indian citizen residing in India. Okay, that is clear. The others have different domains of owning land. So one of the easy workarounds is for the agricultural land to be converted to homestead and then to be sold to those other categories. And even there are restrictions for non-Indian citizens. Non-Indian citizens can buy land in India only if they have an interest in India, as in they are resident here or they have a company here. NRIs, on the other hand, can buy land in India, which is non-agriculture. So, different layers to this problem. Although I have been told that this government is looking at completely knocking off this issue soon. But we'll see.
Very, very insightful progress that is being made by the Indian government in that regard. Next question is a question with regards to bank loans. The question is, kindly advise, is there a bank loan available for pooling a land of 5 to 10 acre, and would it be with or without any collateral?
I don't know of any loan which allows you to buy land. You can use an existing land and use that as collateral to get a loan. And then how you use the loan is a different issue. But then you have to show an income source to be able to repay the loan. It's like a debt servicing capability that you have to show. But money to buy land, I don't think exists in India.
Right. Next question is from Mr. Hazarika. He's asking, what is the future of dehydrated food products? Where can we sell them? For example, if we take 1 kg of tomato and dehydrate it, where can we sell them?
Okay. This will require some research. This is not my domain, but I can only think of a few solutions based on my exposure to foreign markets. There are a number of foreign companies who buy this as a livelihood, sort of. A lot of supermarkets buy it. A lot of food stores in Europe buy it. and most of their procurement is done from the continent, that is from Europe, either Spain or Dubai, depending on how things are. Of course, Dubai is not part of the continent, but Dubai has become a major hub for transshipment as well as for trading. Spain does a lot of production of tomato and then dried tomatoes also. But what you have to do is, if you are considering getting into dried tomato, you really need to be very cautious in terms of creating great partnerships to begin with. Because anybody who's started the business as an export business has suffered tremendously for the first few years. It is always better to create a domestic sale channel, gradually inch outwards and move out. Because otherwise, you are stuck with a huge liability which will cripple you.
Right. So the next question is from Vipin. He's given some personal experience here. So he's mentioned that he owns some farming land in Western UP and have seen tough times in his childhood with regards to farming. When can you say that it can be best bet? I'm not sure how. I would love to explore more about available options.
Difficult question.
So the question, yeah, exactly.
As a open format question, I okay. Let me put it this way: there is no sure shot way of making money in agriculture with just one input saying that I have some land. It has to be a certain size of land. It has to be a certain condition of land. It has to be a certain amount of capital available, and a lot of conditions which are aligned. Only then can we, start thinking about what may make sense. Without this information, I'm sorry, I just can't comment on it. To be fair.
Right. So basically, what we would request you in this matter, Vipin, is that reach out to Mr. Debashish directly, as we have shared his email ID, and you can present your personalized question with regards to the specifications you have mentioned over there. Moving on to the next question, it is from Nick. What are the prospects of citrus fruits in India?
What is sorry?
What are the prospects of citrus fruits in India, citrus fruit farming?
Okay, so there is a fair amount of citrus being grown across India. Nagpur is obviously the biggest growing area, and it's a fairly good crop to look at in terms of stability, in terms of output and markets. There are two issues I see. One is again size of land. That's a common thread more or less across the spectrum. The second is you have to grow something close to markets with a good transport mechanism. So I would probably recommend somebody who's looking at this as a business to first analyze where he can get the land close to a metro. Metro as in a large city. Without that, it becomes really difficult to make it happen. And once done, the land costs become paramount because he has to get the land cheap. And then the transport arrangements, obviously, road availability and transport mechanisms, all that will come. But as a business, definitely quite, I would say, a lower risk business. Let's put it that way, compared to many other forms of business.
Right. The next question is from Amol. He's asking what are the rules with regards to FDI in agricultural sector in India, and what is the guidelines with regards to taxation for the same?
So FDI is now allowed up to 100% in a few spaces: floriculture, greenhouses, uh, seed development. Seed development has some caveats. There are chemicals, agrochemicals, agrofertilizers, specialized fertilizers, and what else? What else? There are seven or eight spaces where they have allowed this. So from that point of view, I don't see a problem in the FDI concept itself. The issue is what is the space that you are looking at. And please note, none of this FDI you have tax freedom. This is not tax-free income for the FDI.
Right. So the next question is again from Mr. Hazarika. He is asking, he has 10 acres of land in Assam near Tezpur. What is the best profitable agricultural product we can grow there?
I'm sorry, this is a little beyond my scope. I need to about this to be able to respond. It will not be fair to comment on this, right?
Agreed. Mr. Hazarika, you can directly write to Mr. Debashish here, and I think he will get back to you with regards to your specific question. So, do we have any other questions? Okay, I think that's all from the attendees side. So personally, I'm a very skeptical person when it comes to investments. I have only purchased SIPs of stable entities, and I go for a like low risk, low profit scenario. However, based on the facts highlighted by you, Devashish, in today's session, and also with reports, I have seen reports from ENY very recently, and also Government of India predicting a huge growth in the agricultural sector. I'm really tempted to take a calculated risk of investing in agricultural or rather agri-tech startups, given that the recent developments happening in this sector are as rapid as they are robust. In fact, I was just speaking to a friend a couple of days back, and we were discussing about agricultural, primarily agri-tech industry, and he mentioned that this industry will become a $24 billion US dollar industry and constitute more than 37% of the country's employability, either directly or indirectly, in the next 5 years. I mean, any thoughts on that matter, Devashish? I mean, do you think that that is a correct estimate?
Can you just quote that number again?
So he mentioned that in the next span of next 5 years, the agricultural industry will become in India will become a $24 billion industry and constitute close to 37% of the country's employability, either directly or indirectly.
So, okay, I have mentioned 125 billion, I mean, 1,25,000 billion. That
Right.
is what? 20, no, that's about 19 billion by 2026. 18,
Right.
19. So, yeah, I mean, we can quibble over numbers, but they are big.
They are big, exactly.
20, 22, but they are big numbers.
Right.
And the way I look at it, the statistics which are quoted today are probably underquoted. As in, I expect Indian growth to be far higher, especially post COVID. Because a lot of people are now beginning to realize that agriculture, funnily, and this is the funniest part, is more stable than a job because they were never really exposed to the possibility that they will lose a job courtesy of pandemic. And they realize that land related operations might actually give them stability which other things don't. So it's a paradigm shift of sorts. I'm not saying that it will end up with this or that, but definitely agriculture has become much more exciting.
Absolutely, could not agree more. Though the recent farm laws are still being debated by the country at large, one thing is for certain, based on what you said and what you have even read also, the agricultural reforms have started in general in the country, and there's no turning back from the rapid growth in both technology and enterprise value of the agricultural industry in the coming decade. I mean, you quoted the numbers there. I think there is no denying it. So I see a couple of more questions coming up. I think we'll just take two questions. So one is from Nick. He is asking, is the use of organic manure profitable for large scale farming?
It depends on the kind of farming, the kind of costs of the manure. I mean, if your cost of manure is very low, as in you have animal husbandry unit allied with your agriculture, it could potentially be zero cost raw material. So organic manure by itself really doesn't completely solve your problem. It does help dramatically. Then again, organic manure has its own internal issues, as in how well you manage it, how well you cure it, and how well you purify it. So, slightly difficult question to give a binary yes no answer, but it can definitely help in cutting costs. But that is only in open farm. In greenhouses, we will not be able to do that because everything is measured. And the problem with organic manure is you can't really measure the inputs that go in towards making the manure. So that would lead to a fairly large amount of variability in your nutrition mix for the plant. Please note, I mean, when I'm talking nutrition mix for the plant, this is a computer driven program which decides how much water, how much NPK, zinc, etc., to give to the plant, and at what point of time in the day. So this is really high tech stuff we are talking.
Right. The next question is from Arjya Das. He's asking, what are the risk areas that we need to look into an agri business before we start? Well, that's a very broad question. Devashish, would you like to take that up?
So a flippant answer would be to say that come join us in our. So incidentally, I mean, I not missed the opportunity. We in our Verve Farmstay thing, we have started a campaign to create stakeholders out of the professional community in India. We, like I said, we are setting up this 550-acre farm in Odisha, and we have about 380 people already signed up who have shown interest in participating here. Our idea is to set up farms across India, each of a 500-acre minimum size. The location 2 is in Belgaum, Karnataka. Location 3 hopefully will be Bijnor, UP, where we identified the land. And then we'll keep adding more sites. Now, in this process, our whole purpose of doing it was to make sure that people who have a passion for agriculture can get to engage in this without taking the hardship that usually a single man business needs to do. Second part is the investment requirements go down dramatically on a per acre basis when you add up in an aggregate. And thirdly, and this is the most important part, which is often missed out, when you do a large project, you can actually absorb a lot of overheads which you can't as a single person. So my submission to all the people who are participating here and to their friends who are keen on agriculture is this: regardless of whether you work with somebody like us or somebody else, or somewhere different, try to create a larger community. Your combinations will actually cut costs so dramatically, it could mean the difference between a profitable project and a loss making. And it will actually help you in your tough times. It will actually help you in growing to sizes you never can do alone. You just never can.
Right. With that, we are concluding today's session. Thank you, Debashish, for your amazing insights. More importantly, thank you, all of you participants, for bringing out such crucial questions, and of course, I mean, technical and non-technical, and keeping this session a really engaging one. Wishing you all a very good weekend, and until next time, on behalf of Hackstrap, take care, stay safe, and a happy weekend.
Thank you, all of you, for being here, and so much to Aso, Sandeep, and Abhigyan for hosting this. By the way, just a quick single word: agriculture excites me like nothing else has, and anyone who needs any sort of help, which I can provide on a email or stuff, I'm more than happy to support you guys. At the same time, I would also encourage all of you to kind of get your hands dirty, so to speak, actually get into some operation of a large unit, just see how it is done, how the technology flows, and you are free to visit our office in Bangalore. You can check it out, or our office in Bhubaneswar. So you can actually get to feel how the planning process of an agriculture project works. And if luck has it, if you wish to join us, please feel free to join us as a stakeholder in any capacity. Thank you so much.
Devashish, I'll definitely take you up on that offer. In fact, I was supposed to be on Bangalore this week, but because of COVID, I had to delay my visit. Count me in, either in June or July. I'll be one of the first people to visit your office then.
We will wait for you. Look forward. Thank you.
Great. See you then. Stay safe, everyone. Take care and a happy weekend.